Hello, and welcome to the Copyrights Law Instructor presentation, where I will walk you through each of the steps of the Assure model to show you the planning that went into making the copyright law lesson for the students. So for the Assure model, we start with the letter A, analyze learners. So first I have to look at the general characteristics of the learners. So I chose to make these students in Miss Stewart's class third graders. And I kind of imagined um, a mixture of different ethnicities and attitudes that I would see in the classroom that I would have. And so I went ahead and split their gender down the middle, 50-50% male and female. We have lots of students who are ELLs, and as far as their attitude, they generally have a good attitude towards learning and get excited when they get to utilize technology. Their specific entry competencies was kind of nicely outlined for us in our assignment. While her students are digital natives that frequently use the internet, like Mrs. Stewart, the students have very little knowledge about copyright rules. So I just went with that information. Learning differences and needs. I imagine these students to be visual spatial learners, verbal linguistic learners, and intrapersonal learners. So with the S, we go to stating standards and objectives. So of course, I went and referenced the TEKS for third grade, and actually the technology applications apply to grades 3 through 5. But I went with TEK number 5, digital citizenship. The student practices safe, responsible, legal, and ethical behavior while using digital tools and resources. Even though this wasn't necessarily a lesson on digital citizenship, copyright did fall under that, under section B, where the student is expected to respect the intellectual property of others, and C, abide by copyright law and the fair use guidelines for educational multimedia. So using that information, I was able to clearly state the student learning objectives. So in this lesson, students would be able to explain copyright, infringement, and fair use in their own words, which those were the key vocabulary words. And students will use the skills learned to cite sources of information used in a personal project. So whatever Ms. Stewart plans on having them do in the classroom, that was the goal, was that they would be able to take the information from this lesson and apply it to any other projects that they might work with either in or out of the library. And overall, I just wanted to make sure that the information that they were gaining from this lesson was going to be transferable. For selecting strategies and resources, when it came to the strategies, I focused on presenting the concept of copyright and interacting with the websites to demonstrate where students may need to look to find information. Whenever we're talking about making sure that we are giving the creators and the authors credit for the work, sometimes we have to do a little bit of digging. And so I wanted to make sure that I was using different programs and websites to show students where they could find this information, because unfortunately, it's not always in a nice, neat little spot where it's just one button click and you have the site right there. Now, that can be the case on some websites like PebbleGo that was used in the student lesson, but sometimes we do have to go and hunt for that information. For the resources, I had to design a Google Slides presentation that to meet students' needs. So making sure that it addressed everything that they needed to know about copyright. And I needed to create a rubric that aligned with standards, outcomes, and objectives, used age-appropriate language, and ultimately was easy to use for teachers and students. For utilizing resources, I went through the 5 Ps. So first I had to preview the resources. So in this case, I previewed PebbleGo and Epic. Prepare the resources. So I have to make sure in real life that students have access to the computer and programs. They have the logins information that they might need, printouts of the Google Forms or Google Forms of the rubrics. So it might be kind of nifty just to do Google Forms of the rubric so that way I can get really quick feedback and not have to deal with paper and pencils. However, so that is always an option to just use the paper and pencil as well. Preparing the environment, I got to make sure I've got that convenient power source. Nothing worse than getting ready to do a computer presentation and then the power goes out or something happens and the computer crashes. So making sure that we have a convenient and reliable power source, a darkened room, and students grouped around computers. So ultimately, I would love to utilize this lesson with a small group participation. To prepare the learners, I want to inform students of the learning objectives right off the bat, introduce unfamiliar vocabulary to them within the lesson, and have some rationale telling how the content relates to them in the real world. So if they're not able to connect with the information in the lesson, chances are they're probably not going to understand or even really remember why this skill is so important. And then, of course, providing the learning experience. So with this presentation, it is this teacher-centered learning experience involving a presentation and demonstration. To require learner participation, students are required to apply, analyze, and synthesize the information learned. So they will evaluate their learning using the rubrics at the end of the lesson and using the skills that they have learned to work collaboratively, excuse me, that's a hard word sometimes, to work collaboratively to discuss what they know about laws and search for information needed to build citations for their own chosen research projects or reports. And then, of course, the lesson will be evaluated using the rubrics to evaluate impact on student learning. So I would use the feedback to revise and make adjustments. So I do have the rubric over to the left that is more feedback from the students for me about what they thought of the presentation. Was it interesting? Could they hear the presentation? Was the teacher easy to understand? I paid attention the whole time. I learned a lot about copyright laws and can tell others about it. I can use the skills I learned to make citations for sources in my own project, which ultimately that's the goal. So hopefully we're seeing a lot of 3s and 4s, but I know that if I got back a bunch of 1s and 2s, that lets me know, okay, I need to go back and adjust something. Plus, I wanted to make sure that I had an area down there at the bottom of that rubric for any comments that they have, if they have questions, or if while they were learning about copyright, it made them think about something else that they want to learn more about. Like maybe they want to learn how to make their own movies or how to do a blog. So I love to find out what else they would like to learn about so that way I could continue meeting their needs. And then, of course, as the teachers and the librarians, we want to be able to assess student learning. So on the right-hand side, so we have the teacher rubric where we're going to go through and check and see, was the student engaged? Did the student participate in discussions and activities? Can the student explain copyright law infringement and fair use in their own words? And are they able to use the skills that they learned to cite sources in their own projects? So that is my lesson all about copyright and all the steps that I took to plan it. Had a lot of fun, and I hope to actually get to use this lesson with a group of 3rd graders in the coming school year. Thank you.